us for the first time this evening. We're coming to you from the Pine River Institute, and the Pine River Institute is an in-person treatment center that serves youth and their families who struggle with addictive behaviors and mental health challenges. Parents and guardians learn and grow alongside their child, participating in a parallel parent program where they learn about the adolescent brain, adolescent development, and how to support their children in their struggles. CFI, or the Center for Family Initiatives, is the educational programming branch of the Pine River Institute. And CFI was really created to respond to the needs of families who may have concerns about mental health or about addiction, but are not yet needing Pine River's intensive in-person treatment. CFI hopes to work with families like yours to both reduce the stigma of talking about mental health and also to offer some tools and strategies that could promote mental wellness and prevent more serious mental health concerns. One of the ways that we're hoping to do this is by offering webinars and sessions like this one, our Masterclass tonight, and to help start that conversation. Now it is my very great pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Payne Bryson as tonight's guest. Dr. Payne Bryson is the author of The Bottom Line for Baby and co-author with Dr. Dan Siegel of 2 New York Times bestsellers, The Whole Brain Child and The No Drama Discipline. Each of these has been translated into over 50 languages, as well as The Yes Brain and The Power of Showing Up. She is the founder and executive director of the Center for Connection, a multidisciplinary clinical practice in Southern California. Dr. Bryson keynotes conferences and conducts workshops for parents, educators, and clinicians all over the world, and she frequently consults with schools, businesses, and other organizations. An LCSW, Tina is the graduate of Baylor University with a PhD from USC. The most important part of her bio, she says, is that she is a mom to her 3 boys. You can learn more about Dr. Bryson at tinabryson.com. And now I'm going to turn things over to our guest. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to join you this evening, given that it's always hard for parents to step away to do these kinds of things. So I always feel sort of honored when people actually make it. I've had many nights when my child's school or something in the community is being offered to parents and I want to go and it's on my calendar and I plan to go and I'm looking forward to it. And then somebody has a meltdown or someone has a project due and, something needs to be purchased or if I get in my car and I'm thinking I'm by myself right now. I could go to the bookstore and get a magazine and some chocolate and take a nap in my car. And that sounds really lovely. So it's hard to actually show up for something like this. So I'm so glad we're getting to be together tonight. There's this story that I heard and no actual children are harmed. It's a made up story, but it's the story about these children who have fallen into this river. And as they travel further and further downstream, they begin to struggle more and more and more, so much so that people become really worried about them. And so these helpers come and start grabbing kids and pulling them out of the river as fast as possible. And at one point, one of the helpers got up and said, and started to walk away. And everyone else said, "Where are you going? These children are really suffering. We need you here." And the person said, "I'm going upstream to find out where they're falling in." And I really love this story because so much of the time as parents, we feel like our child is downstream. We're really worried about them. They're struggling in some way. And we're really feeling like we need to help them. And we're not even sometimes sure how to do that. And then other times as parents, we're more in the upstream part of sort of what's happening, which is we want to keep them from falling in. We want to make sure that they stay on the riverbank. We want to make sure that they're getting the skills and the strategies and that they have the mental health abilities and social and emotional intelligence to keep them on the bank of the river instead of swimming further and further downstream. And those two things can go together too. Sometimes it's both. And sometimes it's, if you have more than one kid is one place and one kid is the other. And sometimes we're the ones downstream. What I want to share with you tonight is about what we know about what builds resilience, what keeps us on the bank of the river, and what helps us get out of the river when we're there. And it's really all the same thing. And it's really about relationship. Now, we have this inborn resilience system that helps us either get out of the river or that helps us keep from falling in the river in the first place. And it's this thing called attachment. And I'm going to talk about what that means in just a moment, but I want to tell you about this research study that was done in the 50s. It was Anna Freud, Sigmund Freud's daughter, and she studied, the study researched something called Operation Pied Piper, which was during World War II. You all, if any of you have watched the movie or read the books, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, you know that a lot of children during World War II in England were put on trains and sent out to the country away from the war. And many of them were sent to strangers' homes. Maybe they were family members, but family members they didn't know. So we had two groups of people. One group of kids who stayed with their parents, stayed with their attachment figures, the people that they felt, you know, like they knew well and that they were attached to. But during war, right? Bombs going off, scary, 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 trauma happening, versus the ones that got sent away from the adversity of war, but to strangers. And you might guess, based on what I've said so far, or maybe something you've read before, that the ones who stayed in the adversity, the ones who stayed in the war zone, but who were with their attachment figures, with their people, fared way better than the ones who were away from challenges and adversity of war, but who were not with their people. So this is really important for us to know, that as the way our brains and nervous systems work is that we are held captive to one another. And as parents, we are meaning makers for our children. Much more than what happens to us is how we interpret and respond to what happens to us and the experiences that follow the adversity. So you might remember this when your children were really little, when they were infants and toddlers. Maybe they heard a scary noise and they looked startled or frightened, and then they would look at your face. And if you looked freaked out, they would begin to cry and they would be upset. But if you looked calm and you said, "Oh, that's an airplane. Did you see the airplane? That was really loud, wasn't it?" Then they would not cry and not get upset. This is one way that we can see, this is one example of how we are meaning makers for our children. And this is true even if they are adolescents and young adults. So there's the event of what happens, there's the experience of the event, and then there's the effects of that. That's Bruce Perry. He talks about the 3 E's, and that's the event, the experience, and the effects of that. So regardless of what the experience of COVID and other adversity that your family or your child has faced or your community has faced, there is a lot we can't control right now, but there's a lot we can control. And so I want to talk to you about really practical ways that we can help our children if they're struggling, and at the same time, build resilience and help them be the best version of them for optimal development. So it all starts with this idea of attachment, as I mentioned. So let me get really clear. Some of you may have heard of the term attachment parenting, a parenting approach that Dr. William Sears coined that really talks about baby bonding kind of stuff. That's really a misnomer. Even if you do if you do nothing that he proposes, you can still have a child who's beautifully, securely attached to you. And just because you do those things like baby wearing, co-sleeping, on-demand feeding, all of those things, you may do those things, but your child might not be securely attached to you. Let's talk about what attachment is and what secure attachment means. Attachment is a branch of science under the umbrella of developmental psychology that studies how humans and mammals, actually all of us as mammals, have this need throughout our whole lifespan called attachment. And attachment is a biological instinct that we have, and the purpose of it is to increase our chances of survival. So let me give a really clear example. So if you're a baby bear cub in the forest and you see a predator, or you get hurt, or you are terrified or in pain or anything like that, when you are in distress, you have a biological drive to get close to your attachment figures. Whoever that mama or papa bear is, whoever that parent bear is, who helps you feel connected and protected, you have a biological drive to get close to them as soon as possible when you are in distress. And what happens then is when that parent bear gets close and communicates signals of, I've got this, I've got you, two things happen. One, the bear, which of course we can always talk about humans too. I'm just giving a mammal example. The bear cub feels safer, and the parent bear getting close to the bear and protecting and connecting with the bear, it reduces the emotional reactivity. So it regulates the emotional response to the fear, to the pain, to the adversity, to the trauma, to the whatever you want to call it. So it regulates the emotional states of the child, the bear cub. The other thing it does, which is almost the same thing, is it regulates physiological states. Now, let me break that down. When the bear cub is scared or hurt, the bear cub's heart is racing, the muscles get tense, there becomes a narrow focus of attention. So different parts of the brain are going online and offline in order to survive the situation. Respiration or breathing will increase, heart rate and blood pressure will increase. So there's a whole physiological cascade that gets activated when we are in distress. So what happens is there's some sort of moment of threat signaling or problem that happens. The attachling, that's a made up word, the bear cub or the human child has this biological instinct to get close, to feel connected and protected. And when the adult does that, shows up in that moment to connect and protect, physiologically and emotionally, the bear cub becomes regulated. Now, I say those are almost the same thing because our emotional states, like feelings of fear and anxiety or anger or whatever it is, and our physiological states are two sides of the same coin. They really are just manifestations of the same thing that's happening in our nervous system. So this is important because what this means is that particularly during times of distress, that's when we most want to be connected and protected. Let me give you the punchline of this entire talk. Punchline 1 and punchline 2. Punchline 1 is this. Based on over 50 years of cross-cultural research, one of the single best predictors for how well children turn out, despite anything that they face in the world, and measuring them on every possible way we can think to measure children. One of the best predictors for how well they turn out is that they have this secure attachment with at least one person. So secure attachment means you are in distress, you have a need, your caregiver sees it and responds or shows up in that moment in a way that most of the time, in a fairly predictable way, regulates your emotions and your bodily states. This is just what we do with our infants, right? Our babies cry, we pick them up, we pat them, they calm back down. This is attachment in action, okay? Now, the second punchline is if this is one of the best predictors for how well they turn out, and by the way, part of the reason is because those repeated experiences over time where you have a need or you're in distress and someone shows up for you and helps you in those moments, it actually helps build the prefrontal cortex. And so it builds the brain in the most optimal ways. And that's one of the reasons it's one of the best predictors. We can get more into that. Let's get really practical though. Before we get really practical, let me say this, the second punchline. If that's what you're saying, okay, Tina, that's one of the most important things I can do for my child then. And you've mentioned secure attachment. So what is insecure attachment and how can I make sure that I'm providing this really, really most important thing for my child? The single best predictor for how well we are able to provide secure attachment to our children is not whether or not we had it with our own parents. This is great news because about 30 to 35% of us grew up with a more insecure pattern of attachment. And I'll talk about that in just a minute and what that looks like. The single best predictor for how well we're able to provide this crucial thing to our child's optimal development is not whether or not we had it with our own parents, but rather that we have reflected on our experiences and made sense of them. In the literature, this is called a coherent narrative. And what that means is instead of running from our past and ignoring what it was like for us as children growing up in our families and what our parents didn't give us that we might have needed, instead of running from that, ignoring it, minimizing it, saying, I don't know, that was the past, it doesn't matter. it's fine. My family was fine. And you just don't look at it. That's actually called an avoidant pattern of attachment. So instead of running from it, and instead of getting flooded by it and entangled by it, where you're preoccupied with it and you think about it all the time and it intrudes all the time in your life without you really doing the work to make sense of it, those are two examples of insecure attachment. And I'll say a little bit more about that. But instead of running from the past or being tangled up in it, that where it rules your life and intrudes all the time, instead, we do our work where we reflect and we say, my parents didn't show up for me. I didn't feel connected and protected, or I felt protected, but not connected. My parents didn't show up for me. They didn't, when I was in distress, I was pretty much on my own, etc. So let me give you a couple of examples of what insecure attachment looks like, briefly, because I want to give you really practical stuff for what you can do every day to cultivate this in your children, because it's so important. So I would encourage you to check out the book, The Power of Showing Up. At the end of each chapter, we have some questions for self-reflection that will help you kind of dig into some of these questions and do some reflection yourself. Ways that we can do our work and get clear on and really make sense of our own stories are, obviously, therapy is one good way to do that. Another is to reflect, journal, talk about it with others. And I'll give some more examples of that, just how that should be an ongoing part of how we parent anyway. What is insecure attachment? So if there's secure attachment, there's got to be insecure attachment. And I'm really oversimplifying, but basically, insecure attachment basically folds out into three main patterns, all of which parents are not doing a good job showing up and regulating emotional states and physiological states. In one pattern of attachment, which is called avoidant attachment, this is where you were really kind of in an emotional desert. Your parents didn't show up for you emotionally. If you were upset or you were in distress, they basically kind of criticized you for being too sensitive. And they'd be like, I don't know, go deal with, like, if you're going to cry, go to your room and cry. And when you're ready to, not be crying, you can come back out. But basically you're given messaging from early on that your emotions are not going to be helped. Your parents are not going to help you if you have an emotional need. Usually physical needs are pretty well taken care of. But just to give you an example, we can assess these patterns starting as early as 12 months in a lab situation called the strange situation. And what's interesting is babies already by 12 months of age have already had enough repeated experiences with their caregivers that even if they're in distress, they're in a strange room with a strange person, and that's a scary thing for any infant. Even though we know they're in distress because we can tell from their heart rate and their galvanic skin response and some other physiological measures, we know the baby is stressed out. When the parent comes back into the room, the baby doesn't ask for help from the parent. The baby doesn't reach for the parent. The baby doesn't cry. The baby just keeps playing with the toys, even though they're in distress, because they've already learned by 12 months of age, my parent's not going to help me with this. I'm better off acting like things are fine. So that's one pattern of insecure attachment. Another pattern is called anxious, ambivalent, or preoccupied attachment. And this is where the parent is really inconsistent. So the child has a need. The parent sometimes shows up and is able to soothe and comfort and help and support, but lots of times is not. Very inconsistent. And in fact, the parent is often flooded with their own need and their own emotions, where sometimes the child has to take care of the parent. But really what this pattern of attachment is about is the child is left feeling anxious about whether or not their need is going to be met, and ambivalent about whether or not they can count on their parent to show up for them. Okay, so that's the foundation of that. And what that looks like, by the way, in the strange situation is the baby gets really upset, reaches for the parent, but the parent is really unsuccessful at soothing the baby. And the baby's very clingy and has a hard time returning to baseline because they're anxious and ambivalent about whether or not they should let the parent go because they might not comfort them in a minute if they need it, etc. The third pattern is the most disturbing one to talk about. And that is where the parent, instead of being the safe protector, is actually the source of terror or the source of pain. So you might imagine if you have a biological instinct, as I've mentioned, to go to your caregiver to protect you, you also then have a biological instinct to get away from what is dangerous. So if your parent is the source of your terror, the source of your physical pain, it actually creates disorganization in the brain. And this is actually called disorganized attachment. And that is one of the best predictors we have for adult mental health challenges in the future. So the good news, though, and the attachment research is full of hope, which is why I love it, is that no matter what, if you grew up with one of those more insecure patterns, history is not destiny. That no matter how you were parented, that if you reflect on those experiences and say, my parent was frightening, my parent was inconsistent and didn't do a good job soothing me, or I was totally left alone to deal with my own stuff. That was really hard for me. Here's how it impacted me. Here's how it still shows up. Even though I swore I wasn't going to be like that, here's how it sometimes shows up for me as a parent. So we do that in conversation, vulnerable conversations with our co-parents, with our spouses, with our best friends, in therapy, through journaling, etc., and through ongoing reflection, doing our own work, and keeping in mind that we are meaning makers for ourselves as well. So I really want to encourage you. We're going to talk more a little bit about that in just a few minutes. So those are the more insecure patterns. Again, the most important thing is we provide secure attachment to our children. The way we do that best is by reflecting on our own stories and making sense of them, not running from them or not being flooded by them, but looking at them, working them through, doing our work. So now what I want to talk to you about in the rest of our time together, and we can get really practical in the Q&A as well. Like if you guys want to ask me about struggles with your teenager who refuses to talk to you, or if you want to talk to me about your 4-year-old who won't get out of the bathtub without a major meltdown, or whatever it is, sibling conflict. We can talk about all of those things. What I want to do now is talk to you about what do we do. I have 3 boys who are now 22, 18, and 15. And I want to talk to you about what we do in the everyday moments that cultivate secure attachment. If that's the best predictor for how my kid's going to turn out, if it's the best predictor for how I'm going to build their brain in the most optimal ways, how do I do that? What does that look like during the homework battles, and during bedtime battles, and during meltdowns, and during your kid shutting down, or when your kid is anxious, or when you are freaking out and losing your mind and not being the parent you want to be? What does all of that look like? How do we do this, Tina? I'm going to tell you. The 4 S's. So the 4 S's are what we're going to do in order to cultivate our child's secure attachment to us. The first one is safe. And I'm going to spend the most time on safe because it's the most important and it's where we need to start. Now, you might be thinking, why is she going to spend the most time on safe? I mean, isn't that kind of obvious? We just protect them from harm. Yes, we protect them from harm. And usually parents are pretty good at this. When they are adolescents, we are thoughtful about whose house they're going to, and if parents are there watching, or whose cars they get into. When they're younger, we're making sure that they're supervised near water. At any age, we make sure they're wearing their seatbelts. All of these things. So of course we want to protect them from physical harm, but the safe I'm going to talk about is much more than that. So I'm going to talk about safe first, and then I'm going to hit the other 3, which are seen, soothed, and secure. Let's start with safe. I want to teach you a word that's one of my favorite jargony words. It's a word that a guy named Stephen Porges came up with. And I'm just going to type his name in the chat there. So you have it, Stephen Porges. And you might have heard of him. He's known for something called polyvagal theory. And the word that I'm going to use is neuroception. Neuroception is a type of perception. Now, our perception is so we have lots of different types of perception. Some of them we are aware of, and some of them we are not. Let me talk for a minute about our prefrontal cortex. Some of you might know the book, The Whole Brain Child, that Dan Siegel and I wrote about, where we talk about the different parts of the brain, and we even have the hand model, right? The lower parts of the brain. So this would be like brain stem and limbic area. And then if we have our little model like this, it would be sitting in so this would be the top of the head, the back of the neck, but this would be like brain stem, limbic area, cortex. So it would sit in our head like this. And really the way I teach this to little kids is I say, down here in the lower parts of our brain, this is where we have really big feelings and we just want to do stuff. And up here, this top part of our brain, this is the part of our brain where we pause and make calm, kind choices, and we are problem solvers. But sometimes when we get really big feelings, our bodies get really upset, or we just really want to do something, it's like we flip our lids. And it's really hard to use this part of our brain where we pause and make calm, kind choices and problem solvers. And then of course you can talk to kids about, well, how do you hug the lower part of your brain again? What do you need to calm down? And then kids come up with some really good stuff that's usually supported by the neuroscience, like touch and hug, movement, taking deep breaths, etc. So let me say really quickly about this hand model. So right behind the orbits of your eyes and your forehead is something called the prefrontal cortex. And you all are familiar with the prefrontal cortex. It's a very popular part of the brain right now. If it had its own Instagram account, it would definitely have a blue check. It's very popular right now. The reason it's so popular is because not only is the last part of the brain to develop, which means we have the widest window in which to impact how it gets developed, which is great news. But let me tell you what that part of the brain does. And this is actually, these are all outcomes of secure attachment. Okay, this is why we know it helps build the brain. Regulating emotions. I'm going to just give you 10 of the many, many things it does. Regulating emotions, regulating our bodies, our physiology, sound decision-making, insight, empathy, fear extinction. So you're scared about something, you're willing to try it again. Attuned communication. So tuning into somebody else's mind and communicating in appropriate ways. Response flexibility. That's being flexible and adaptive cognitively, emotionally, behaviorally. Intuition and morality. And I can give you one more, which is executive functions. A lot of executive functions are there. Those are all functions of the prefrontal cortex. When you look at all of those together, this is really where we have a lot of awareness. We can kind of think things through. We do a lot of higher order thinking. And it's really the foundation of our social emotional intelligence. And it's the foundation of mental health. So as a mental health professional, anytime someone's in my office or feels like they need to be seen by a psychotherapist, it's something on that list. It's something with this prefrontal cortex. Why this is important, again, secure attachment builds that part of the brain, making it more likely that they have those capacities. But this is the part of the brain we use when we are aware of something. Okay, so mindfulness requires this part of the brain. Being aware of things requires this part of the brain. Neuroception is a type of perception that is not using this part of the brain. So this is part of the cortex. This prefrontal cortex is part of the cortex. Neuroception is subcortical, meaning below the cortex, meaning it's in the lower structures of the brain and in our whole nervous systems and in our bodies. So neuroception is a type of perception that we're typically not aware of, although once you learn about it, you will start becoming aware, which is super cool. But it's a type of perception we're typically not aware of, where our nervous system and the lower structures of our brain are trying to determine every moment about safety versus danger. Is something dangerous, or is there a threat here, or is this safe? So our neuroception for threat and safety guides everything we do from moment to moment. When we have a neuroception of safety, we use our whole brain. We use the prefrontal cortex, all those things I just talked about. We can learn. We can be curious. We can regulate our emotions, all of those things. When we have a neuroception for threat or a neuroception for danger, we stop using that part of the brain very well. And we go much more into the fight, flight, freeze, faint, or collapse, where we just shut down. And we are not using our whole brain in those moments. So what we want to do as part of safety is to cultivate our children's neuroception for safety, especially given how much threat there is in the world now, how much messaging they're constantly getting about how dangerous the world is. So how are we to cultivate a neuroception of safety, knowing that when our child has a neuroception of safety, they're using their whole brain, they're able to regulate their emotions, they're able to make better decisions, they're able to be curious and learners, etc. So here are some things we can do to cultivate our child's sense of safety in the world. Number one, be predictable. Create predictability. The brain hates unpredictability because unpredictability is the possibility of threat and danger. If we don't know what's coming, we have to assume it might be dangerous. So unpredictability can activate a neuroception of danger or threat. This is why, for many reasons, along with many other reasons, the pandemic has been so difficult for so many people, is because there is continuing to be so much unpredictability. We, though, as parents, can cultivate a neuroception of safety for our children by creating predictability. Now, there's a lot of predictability already in the world. When you look at mid-April, where you live, you know what trees and flowers are blooming. You know what the temperatures are typically like. And so we can say to our kids, like right now in my yard, my roses are blooming like crazy, and the irises are coming up. So I can say to my kid, oh, look, the irises and the roses are blooming just like they always do in April. So when we have a rhythm to our seasons, and we have rhythms in nature, which are fairly predictable. Now we know that's changing over time as well, but right now we can point out the rhythms of what's already happening around us in nature. We can also create predictability by having routines and rituals and rhythms in our own families. Now, when I think about what we do in my family, it tends to be very food-based, which is, that's kind of funny, but every Saturday we have breakfast burritos. Every Thursday I make oatmeal with berries. Every Monday I make an egg sandwich. And that sounds a little bit like monotony to some of you, and we do need novelty, but only once we have a neuroception of safety. So particularly if you have a child who's dealing with some anxiety and some tentativeness in the world in a way that they typically don't, create more rhythms, rituals, etc. Have your kid help you make a playlist of music to play on school mornings. And that can play in your car or in your home before school. So those are some ways you can create predictability. Now, one of the most important things I just said about this is that the brain hates unpredictability. And we want to create predictability in the rhythms, routines, and rituals in our families. But we need to be predictable too. So what happens when we're not? Now, I don't know about you all, but lots of times as a parent, I'm patient and I'm patient and I'm patient and I'm patient and I'm patient until I'm not patient. And then I flip my lid and I act like a crazy person. And by the way, they never give me credit for the 45 minutes I controlled my temper and I controlled my frustration and how patient I was for so long. What they remember is the moment I lose it, right? So I'll just tell a quick little story. I was playing a game with my children, this Yahtzee dice game with my boys. They were fighting with each other. It was driving me crazy. And I started out, I didn't go full blown this all at once. I kind of started doing this, creeping, and didn't catch myself in time. But I started with immature sarcasm, like, oh, I'm so glad we're playing games, guys. Like, this is so fun. What a wonderful way to spend time together. Like that kind of thing, kind of biting. I think sarcasm is actually really fun with kids who are ready for it because it develops great prefrontal context and humor and all of that, but not when it's biting and not nice. So I was not nice. Then I flip my lid and I end up yelling at them and throwing the dice across the room like a crazy person. So here I am, predictable. And then I'm unpredictable. I act like a crazy person. What do we do in those moments? And by the way, there's a ton of science behind why that happens. We're human beings. My nervous system, I flipped my lid because remember this part down here? When you have really big feelings, I had big feelings and my physiology and my emotions got dysregulated. I didn't pause. I didn't walk away. So I flipped my lid and I was unpredictable. Again, a message of hope from the literature on attachment, which is, and you guys are going to love this, when we mess up as parents and we are not the parents we want to be, we are not calm, we are not kind, we're reactive. As long as we're not talking about abuse, obviously, but as long as we make the repair with our child, it is beneficial for them that we messed up. Isn't that great news? I love this news. Okay. What does that look like, repair? Well, we want to say to our kids, first of all, I wanted to teach my boys, you are responsible for your own behavior no matter what anybody else does, which means I can't blame them. I can't say, if you guys had stopped fighting when I told you to, that wouldn't have happened. That's not what I want to teach them. What I want to teach them is that they need to take responsibility for their own behavior. So I have to model it. So I'm going to model for them how to make a repair. So that's a good thing, but that's not the only reason it's beneficial. What I'm going to say to them is, oh, guys, some version of this, whatever feels right to you in your language and your approach. Guys, I got really mad there, really frustrated, and I didn't handle that very well. I really wish I had done that differently. I really wish I hadn't yelled at you. I really wish I hadn't thrown the dice. I'm so sorry. I know that must have been kind of scary and not fun for you. Will you forgive me? I might even ask for a do-over. In that moment, let's break this down for a moment. So I'm predictable and then I'm not predictable. Activates a neuroception of danger for our kids, for my kids in that moment. But they know based on lots and lots of previous experiences that even though in this moment, the relationship feels messy and there's conflict and this doesn't feel good and they don't like it, it does not mean the relationship is over. They know that I'm going to come and make it right really soon. So they can sit in the discomfort of the conflict of a relationship and know that I'm going to come make it right and it's going to be good again. So what that does is it actually widens their window of tolerance for the inevitable conflict of relationships. So it's actually relational resilience building when we mess up, as long as we make the repair. So that's really good news. That's another way we can create a neuroception of safety and cultivate safety, is to repair after a rupture with them. A couple other things I'll suggest in terms of helping our children feel safe, and then I'll move on. One is, and this is very much as true for our teenagers as much as it is for our littles and everything in between, including ourselves, play and playfulness and silliness. I won't go too much into the science for time's sake, but our neurological systems, when we are in play states, play, playfulness, silliness, laughter, moving our bodies, having a good time, that neurophysiological state is almost the opposite of what a neurophysiological state is when we have a neuroception of danger and threat. So what this tells us is, and I really love, there's a book called The Opposite of Worry. I'm putting it in the chat, by the way, and it's by Lawrence Cohen, who wrote Playful Parenting, which I really like that book too. If you go to my website, which is tinabryson.com, there's a tab there that says Tina's Favorites, and a bunch of the books that I just love and that have had big influence on me in my own parenting and my clinical work are there. And this book should be there as well. But really, this book talks about how we even use play and playfulness to help our child combat anxiety and anger and all these kinds of things. It's been a really, really helpful book for my work with lots of kids. So what we want to do in our homes is create opportunities for play, playfulness, silliness. I'll be really practical about that in a couple of ways. One is, little kids are easier. They just play. They just do. You join in, you follow their lead, you make time for it. Even if it's just 10 or 15 minutes a day, following their lead, giving them, protecting their time to play, unstructured play. It's really important. It's resilience building. It builds the brain, and it creates a neuroception of safety while they're playing, because they're working through the things that are bothering them, and they're building better skills for self-regulation over time. So it's both rehabilitative and protective. So really honoring and protecting that time for play. Now, one of the big things that gets in the way of time for play and playfulness in our families are screens. We can talk more about that in the Q&A if you guys have specific questions. But what I will say is that a lot of our tweens and younger children as well, and teens as well, even if they're not on their devices, a lot of times they don't know what to do with themselves. And just like when your kids were little and you had to kind of help them find ways to spend their time, you may need to do that with your older kids too, who should, according to our expectations that are realistic or unrealistic, it doesn't matter, feel like they ought to be able to entertain themselves. But if you want your kids off their devices, you might need to offer them other alternatives that are relational and fun. So it could be as simple as, hey, let's create, my friend Jessica Leahy, who wrote a beautiful book, it's this red book right behind me, called The Addiction Inoculation. She set up based on a television show that her teenage boys loved, she set up a hot sauce competition where the thing they were eating got hotter and hotter and hotter, and they could see who could go the furthest. So that's kind of elaborate. That takes a lot of planning, but fun. It might even be just a moment where you're like, it's still screen time, but it's relational. Like, let's watch some hilarious dog videos, or you watch those funny videos of goats screaming, or you ask your kid, like, show me the funniest video you've seen in the last couple of days. And you just join with them in that. It might be something as simple as, hey, let's go stand on opposite sides of the room and call the dog and see who she comes to. And let's see if we can, that kind of thing. So you might have them help you make something, or surprise someone, or pull a practical joke on someone, going for a walk, pulling out baby pictures, these kinds of things. You might need to find ways to help them. But I will also say, just being playful yourself is really helpful for eliciting cooperation. Your teenagers still need to be hugged. I say to my sons, you may not need a bedtime hug, but I need a bedtime hug before you go to bed. So they hug me before they go to sleep at night. Recently, my teenager was supposed to come downstairs and help me with something, and he come down to dinner, and he didn't come down. And I was really annoyed. And they always have their earbuds in, so even when I yell for them, they can't hear me. So I had to come upstairs, and I was frustrated, but I tried to be playful. So I'm 5'4", my son is 6 feet tall. I sat on him. He was in his bed on his computer, and I sat on him, and I said, oh, I'm so glad you didn't come downstairs when you were supposed to, because I'm so tired now from walking upstairs to come and get you. I really need to rest. And so then I sat on him, and then just got floppy on him. And then he was like, okay, fine, I'm coming. And he kind of pushed me off him. And, it really was, it's a playful, silly way to engage with our children. And so trying to cultivate laughter, play, silliness, those kinds of things. 2 more tips. 1, you as the parent, creating in your family a culture of competence and confidence. What this means is we cannot be freaking out. You can freak out. You're probably freaking out. We all do from time to time, but we want to really save that for our therapists, our significant others, our best friends, with our children. And it's fine to be vulnerable with your children in a way where you're like, I'm not sure about this, or I'm feeling a little bit anxious about this, but here's what I'm going to do about it. So even if we are vulnerably not using our children as therapists, but we're authentically talking about what we're experiencing in a way that's appropriate developmentally and in terms of what we would share with our children, so they don't have to worry about us, we still want to communicate to them, whatever's going on, you've got this. I know you can handle this. Not in a false toxic positivity way, but like your kid's like, I don't know what to do about this social situation, or I'm really struggling in this class, or I'm feeling really down. We want to say, like, what's going on, and we want to connect with them. And then we can say, you know what? We will figure this out. So it might be, we've got this. We will figure this out. I'm here with you while we walk through this difficult thing. And you've got this. And so we really want to give them the message that we've got them. This does not mean over-functioning for them and doing everything for them, but the sense that they are not going to walk alone through adversity, that we trust that they can handle things, that they should trust that we can handle it too. So this is kind of just this idea that we've got this. I will help you. I'm here with you. And then the last thing is to think about you and your relationship with your child, where you are like a safe harbor. So if you imagine your child as a sailboat out in the seas of life, no matter what storms are blowing them around and what storms rage inside their lives and in their world, that you are always the safe harbor they can come to. For me, that means when things are hard, I'm going to be here for you, you're going to be in trouble. What that means is that when I pick my kid up from school, or when they walk in the door of our house, I want things to feel things are always chaotic, but I want things to feel like, this is a good, comfortable, safe place to be. I like being here. I like being in the car with my mom. I like being at home, eating dinner with my family. I like being here because it feels good. And so what this means to me is that if I want to be the harbor in the storm for my child, I can't be the storm. And then when I am the storm, I'm going to make the repair with them. Okay. My friends Bill Stixrud and Ned Johnson wrote a couple of great books also on that list. Their most recent one is called What Do You Say? And it's a whole book about what you say to your kids to mobilize them to be autonomous and to be motivated in the world. It's a great book, but they have a whole chapter called A Non-Anxious Presence. And I really love that. That's really the idea of culture of competence and safe harbor kind of pulled together. All right, so that's safe. Lots of things around safe. Seen is difficult. Seen is about seeing the mind behind the behavior. This is hard to do because as a society, we are hyper-focused on behavior. We're hyper-focused on extinguishing behaviors, and we're hyper-focused on making kids do things that they may not be doing, that they need to be doing. And so we're so focused on behavior that we often forget about what's happening inside and what's happening that's leading to the behavior. And this is a whole other talk based on my book, No Drama Discipline. And if you follow me on Instagram, I'm doing lots of stuff around discipline and behavior these days. Every Monday I do a discipline mistake. I call them Mistake Mondays, and I talk about mistakes we make in terms of discipline. And but I'm doing a lot on that. I'll briefly say that behavior is communication about what skills haven't yet been built. And the whole point and purpose of discipline is to raise children to become self-disciplined. And the way we get them there is through lots of teaching and skill building. So discipline is actually 100% about teaching and skill building. And so really every time we're addressing behavior and trying to change behavior in some way, we should always have teaching in mind instead of just what consequence should I give. We should be like, what is the skill I want them to learn here? What do they need to practice? What other strategies might they need to be more successful the next time this situation comes up? So that whatever I'm doing in the moment makes it more likely my kid can do better the next time. That's really what discipline is about. So this, though, requires that we also think about how behavior is not just communication, but it's often a symptom of something. So if your kid is, I'll give an example, if my 4-year-old is having a total meltdown about getting out of the bathtub, that meltdown and that tantrum is giving me information that his nervous system is in distress. And he's also saying, I need some skill building as development unfolds for how to regulate my emotions when I'm disappointed or things don't go my way. If we're only focused on the behavior, it's basically like if you have a cough and you're just constantly putting cough drops in your mouth. And you can keep trying to stop the cough from happening, but makes much more sense to find out why you're coughing. If you have allergies, that's a different treatment versus if you have, a bacterial infection where you need antibiotics, right? So unless we deal with what's underneath the behavior, we're going to still keep seeing the same symptoms over and over and over again. When it comes to seen, what I really mean is at the end of your child's childhood, what your child will say is, my parent got me. They understood me. They really knew who I was and how I operate and who I am. And they love me for who I am, not who they wanted me to be. That's the ultimate goal of seen. What that looks like in everyday moments is tuning into the mind behind the behavior, tuning into what's happening in their internal landscape. Yes, behaviors may need to be dealt with, but sometimes we do it in the wrong order. Okay, so let me give it an example. So I offered to take my kid. I said, hey, I'm going to pick you up after school and I'm going to take you to the movies. And he was really excited. He got really excited. And he said, can I get some popcorn at the movies? And I said, no, not today. We've had a lot of junk food. We're not getting popcorn, but I'll bring you a snack and you can eat that on the way to the movie theater. And he did this. So I get, my first instinct is, are you kidding me? I'm taking you to the movies and you're going to pout about not getting popcorn. Do you know how spoiled you are? And I start going down that path, which is actually fear-based parenting. I'm worried that my kid, just because he's pouting in this moment, is going to amount to nothing in the world because he's so spoiled, right? I make these big leaps, fear-based parenting. What seen requires me to do is to swim past that behavior. I'm going to address that behavior for sure. But first, I'm going to be curious and I'm going to tune into his internal experience so that when I respond to him, it matches how he actually feels, where he feels felt and he's like, yeah, you got it. That's how I feel. So instead of throwing out the threats and taking away the movie, here's how I handled it. Oh, something just happened. When I said movies, you got really excited. And then when I said no popcorn, something happened. And I'm seeing you're pouting there. What's going on? Well, last time you got me popcorn, and I love movie popcorn. We don't get it very often. We don't go to the movies very often. And I just love it so much. So when you said I couldn't have it, it kind of bummed me out. So I now respond to what he has shared with me in a way that feels good to him. So I say, oh, you got really excited. You had this like idea and this expectation and this hope. And then when it didn't happen and I said no, you felt disappointed. Is that right? And he said, and he nodded. And I was like, yeah, when we feel disappointed, we don't get something we hope for. That can feel really disappointing. I totally get that. We're not going to do the popcorn today. Would you still like to go to the theater? So even though I'm saying no, I'm not saying, sure, fine, you can have popcorn. I don't want you to feel disappointed, you precious little angel who I never want you to feel any discomfort in the world. No, I can say no to the behavior, but still say yes to his experience and his feelings. Because what happens is if I go that you're so spoiled, or I can't believe you're going to pout about that, or forget it, I'm not taking you to the movies. If I minimize how he's feeling, like you're making such a big deal out of nothing, you should just be glad about the movies. If I minimize or I criticize, the brain is an association machine. So his experience in that moment, if I minimize or criticize, or I threaten based on his behavior, he's like, oh, I just shared how I felt with my mom in my face and eventually with my words. And that did not feel good. Maybe I'm not going to do that next time as much. And over time, when we say to our kids things like, I don't want to hear it, or we communicate that to them without meaning to, they internalize that message. So what I want to do is, even if I'm saying no to the behavior, I'm saying yes to him and yes to sharing with me. And this is a safe place for you to share. Let me give an example for a younger kid. My little guy in the bathtub freaking out because it's time to get out, and he's mad about some Lego guy. You all know that basic story. He has Legos in the thing, but there's one particular Lego that's not in the tub. And so he's overtired and he starts having a total tantrum. So the way I handle it is, first, I'm practicing safe by being predictable, holding a boundary. I've told him it's time to get out. I'm going to hold my boundary. That helps him feel safe because I'm being predictable, and I'm going to stay the calm in the storm. Two ways I do that is, one, I remind myself at his worst, this is when he needs you the most. And I basically remind myself, now is when he needs you to be the calm in the storm and not the storm, because the storm is contagious. Okay. So I prepare myself in just a split second or two by reminding myself of these things. I sometimes put a hand on my chest and my belly and take a nice big deep breath to just ground myself. Then I say to JP, it's time to get out. You can get out by yourself, or I will help you out. He says, I'm not getting out. And he splashes me, which again, easily could send me into the flip my lid, situation. I stay the calm in the storm. And if I don't, I'm going to make the repair with him. So no one be too hard on yourself. So I say, okay, it's time to get out. And I put my hands under his slippery little armpits and I pull his little body out. And as I do that, I'm also going to practice scene. And I'm going to respond to him in a way that matches how he feels, and to let him know I get it. So I say to him, you're so mad you have to get out of the tub. You really wanted to stay in and play with that one Lego guy. Is that right? And he's like, yes. I say, yeah, that's really hard, Betty. I know. So scene is really just about connecting with that internal experience. Now, by the way, with the popcorn situation, I make a mental note to myself, a little bit of not handling being given a gift, like a little bit of graciousness, and how do you respond to someone who's doing something nice for you? And if it doesn't go exactly like you like, that's a skill we can build. Some gratitude and some perspective in the world. Those are some skills. So at dinner time, we're going to start doing a gratitude practice, and we're going to do some role play around how to, that didn't feel very good. And what could you have said differently? How could you have said, hey, Mom, I'm really excited you're taking me to the movie. I really appreciate that. And when you said no about the popcorn, that was disappointing, but it's okay, or whatever. So we could do some talking about that. All right. So I can address the behaviors later, right? But in the moment, I'm going to connect with the emotions, connect before I redirect the behavior. Let's go now to soothed. Soothed is what it sounds like. It's comforting, it's nurturing, it's supporting, and it's helping. When our children are physically hurt, it's so much easier for us to go to soothed. If your teenager is crying and upset, it's so much easier to go to soothe than if the dysregulation and the big emotions come out as coming out attacking you, right? If they're yelling at you and you're so mean and, you know, I hate you and you don't know anything, like it's so much harder to soothe in that moment than it is if they're crying and they're saying, you know, I'm really feeling left out from my friends. Like it's much easier. But sometimes we have to remember that at their worst, that's still when they need us the most, even if it looks like it's coming at us, right? It just comes out differently. It may come out as really bad behavior, but it's still a bid for connection. It's still I am in distress. And as an attachment mammal, I need connection and protection. It's really hard to remember. Keep this in mind. When the part of the brain, when we are in physical pain, the same part of our brain lights up as when we are in emotional pain. It looks the same when we look under brain scans. So remind yourself of that. Okay. So soothing can happen lots of different ways. I don't discount comfort in terms of physical comforts. During the pandemic, many of us liked fuzzy blankets and elastic waistbands and comfort foods and fuzzy, slippers and warm beverages. Like physical comforts are soothing. They feel nurturing to us. So if your teenager is freaking out about something, bring them a glass of ice water and a snack or a cup of tea. When JP was freaking out about getting out of the tub, I wrapped the towel around him and pulled him to me and hugged him. So that's a physical comfort we can do. The other part of it is providing our presence and just showing up. So let me take this a little bit further. So after I've wrapped the towel around him, after I've pulled him out of the tub, I say to him, this is so hard. You really wanted to stay in the tub and you're really angry. And those are some really big feelings. And I'm right here with you. And that's really kind of all it is. Let me give another example of a 10 or 11-year-old moment. Same kid, bedtime. I have always been very militant about bedtime because sleep is crucial to the prefrontal cortex doing its best work and staying integrated. It's time for him to go to sleep. The older brothers, who are 3 years older than him in two different steps. So let's say he's 10, they're 13 and 16. So they're teenagers. It's Friday night. They have friends over. It's time for him to go to bed. I tell him it's time to go to bed. He's like, it's not fair. They get to stay up. Can I stay up 15 minutes longer? Sure. I let him stay up, which just means he's 15 minutes more tired for the battle that we're about to have. I pull some books together. I climb into the bed for our bedtime routine. And he is so angry. He's like a fish out of water, flopping all over the bed. You're so mean. This is so unfair. I hate you. And he's just coming at me. I can say, my first instinct is to say, you know what? If you're going to talk to me like that, you put yourself to bed. I'm done. I'm out of here. Which is a lose-lose. Doesn't teach him any skills, makes him more dysregulated, makes it longer before he goes to sleep. The battle's going to be longer. That's not going to help anybody. So I stay calm as best I can. And I can either say, I don't let anybody talk to me like that. So I will help you calm down. Or if we need to take a quick pause and just give you a few minutes to calm down, I'm going to be right here with you if you need me, but I don't let anybody talk to me like that. So you could do that. Or my preference typically is to know he doesn't typically talk to me like this. He's flipped his lid. He's a kid. His prefrontal cortex is still developing. We will address the behavior later. He's not going to do that when he's 20, not to worry about it too much, to trust development. So here's what I do in that moment. I will tell you what I used to do. I used to spend a lot of mental and emotional energy trying to figure out, what do I do? How do I say? How do I fix this? How do I get him to go to sleep? What strategies and tactics do I use, etc. I don't have to do any of that. What I've come to learn is the most important thing around this connection and protection and around this S of soothed is just my calm presence. So I say to JP, I walk through, I stay calm myself. I become the safe harbor. Scene, I say to him, it feels really terrible when something feels unfair. I understand. That's such a hard feeling. And you're just really mad that you have to go to sleep and they get to stay up. Is that right? And he's like, yes. And I say, I know, that's really hard. And here's the soothed. This is so simple, y'all. I'm right here with you while you're feeling those big feelings. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. I've got you. He doesn't usually then immediately Don't have an unrealistic expectation. Your kid's not going to be like, well, thank you, that's so helpful, and now I'm going to regulate my nervous system in 30 seconds and be ready to snuggle and go to sleep. It takes them some time. Not long, though. Typically for most kids, what it typically would look like in that moment is I'd say, let me know when you're ready for me to read, though, but I'm right here and I will listen if you want to talk more. Fine, just read. And then 2 or 3 minutes later, he snuggles in, and then he's cozy and regulated. And then at that point, or maybe even the next day, keeping in mind that my whole goal of discipline is to teach and build skills. So I want to wait, make sure he's in the state of mind in which to learn best. And maybe I don't want to go back to it because it's bedtime. I can absolutely wait till the next day. Or I can say, you know what, when you talk to me like that, that doesn't feel very good. It's okay to be angry, but it's not okay to say that. So what could you say next time differently, right? So that's how I might address the behavior. But I say, I'm right here with you while you feel it. Now, at the end of that interaction, he's learned I can handle his big feelings. He doesn't have to protect me. I am the attachment figure. I've got him. He's learned that I trust that he can handle big feelings. And here's the thing, y'all. How do we develop resilience? We become resilient by practicing dealing with difficult things, difficult emotions, difficult situations with enough support. What determines whether adversity or even trauma makes us fragile versus making us resilient is someone showing up with their presence and giving us enough support. So my kid got practice dealing with some really hard, difficult feelings. And I was like, go ahead, you feel them, baby. I trust that you can handle this. And he's come to be like, yeah, I guess I can handle those feelings. So this is a resilience building moment, even if it's really unpleasant and he's really annoying in the moment to me. Okay, so that's the whole thing with Soothed, is we show up in the moment with our calm presence. And I want to tell you that kids' development is not linear. They don't just learn a skill and keep going. It's up and down. They make progress, then they have regressions, and it's all over the place. You might feel like, gosh, my kid's in 5th grade. They shouldn't need my help anymore with homework. If your kid's really anxious right now, they might need more support. What I'm saying is kids might need more soothing right now. Your teenagers might need more soothing. Your older kid might need you to lie down with them for a few minutes as they're getting ready to go to sleep at night. They might need to be in your room as they're falling asleep, etc. It's okay to provide them with soothing. Where we get into trouble is if we don't have any boundaries, right? So we can really think about all of this, knowing that when we help our kids feel soothed and show up for them, which again does not mean fixing everything and not making them feel things. It's about letting them feeling it with the support, that this is how they build resilience. Now, let me wrap up so we can do questions. The 4th S is secure, which is our goal. We want them to have secure attachment. And the way they get that is by having not perfect, by having flawed experiences of feeling safe and seen and soothed enough. So enough predictable experiences, the typical experience of feeling safe and seen and soothed enough so that their brain wires to have an expectation and trust that based on all these previous experiences that are imperfect, that if they have a need, you will show up for them. You will see the need and you're going to be there. And what's more important is that when we do that predictably and sensitively, although not perfectly, our children's brains also learn how to show up for themselves. They learn how to see and understand themselves, how to keep themselves safe, how to see and understand themselves, how to soothe themselves, and how to show up and provide secure relationships to their friends, future partners, and future children. Let me wrap up by saying this. There are lots of times as a mom that I don't know the right answer. I don't know if I'm headed in the right direction or if I'm handling something the way I should. The 4 S's is always my North Star. If I can respond to my child in a way that helps them feel safe and seen and soothed and secure and knowing I'm going to keep showing up for them, then I am doing the best possible thing I can do for them relationally and in terms of their brain development. It is my North Star. And by the way, works in your romantic relationships and in your friendships, because we all need the 4 S's. And in fact, if you're going to give your kids the 4 S's, you need someone who shows up for you. Are you showing up for yourself? Are you helping yourself feel safe and seeing and cultivating a neuroception of safety in your life, and seeing and understanding yourself and soothing yourself and being present, showing up for yourself? And do you have people who do that for you? We all need people to give us the 4 S's so we can do it for our children. I'm going to take questions now, but I'm going to say one more thing, and that is this. What your children need most from you is you. Flawed you, imperfect you, sometimes the storm you. You're a better parent than you think you are. And even to your teenagers, and even when your children communicate to you that they do not like you and do not love you, you are still the most important person in their lives. So what your kids need most from you is very liberating. It's just you, simply you showing up.